Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. Victor Newman doesn't just expose a secret in this explosive Genoa city reckoning, he detonates a verity so devastating it fractures a family beyond form, and it all begins with a single envelope that lands like a blast in the middle of a tense battle, because Victor, gravestone-faced and mercilessly calm, has eventually decided that Phyllis Summer's reign of falsehoods ends now. And the DNA evidence he's holding is the kind of armament only Victor would unleash with surgical perfection. 4 times, Phyllis has cleaved to a precisely curated story about Daniel's origins, spinning half-trueness and emotional manipulation into a narrative that made her the wounded idol and everyone differently the villain. But Victor has always suspected there was further spoilage beneath the face, further deception hidden behind her righteous fury, and when whispers reached him, quiet at first, also insolvable to ignore, that the timeline didn't add up, that's certain. Medical records had been altered and a long-buried maternity question had no way truly been answered. Victor did what Victor does: stylish. He delved, he dragooned, he paid, and eventually he tested, and now the results are in, stamped with cold scientific certainty that leaves no room for denial. The reveal happens in brutal fashion, not in private, not with compassion, but in front of the people whose lives will be shattered most. Because Victor believes verity should burn down lies no matter who gets scorched, and as he lays out the data, chain of guardianship, lab verification, an alternate test to exclude any mistrustfulness, Daniel's world tilts on its axis, his breath catching as the words sink by, because the DNA proves that the man Phyllis swore was his natural father is not, and the counter-accusations ripple outward with sickening speed, dragging every memory Daniel has of his nonage. Every moment of fidelity to his mama, through a grinder of mistrustfulness and treason. Phyllis tries to intrude, tries to pivot, tries to weaponize emotion the way she always has, criminating Victor of atrocity, of preoccupation, of playing God with people's lives. But Victor doesn't raise his voice or blench, he simply slides the paperwork across the table and says the quietest, deadliest words imaginable: the verity doesn't need your authorization. And in that moment Phyllis knows she's lost control, because Daniel isn't looking at Victor presently. He's gaping at her, searching her face for some sign that this is a mistake, a trick, a Newman power play gone too far, but all he finds is vacillation, and that vacillation is louder than any concession. Recollections flash in Daniel's mind like broken glass, missed birthdays, unforeseen relocations, Phyllis's overprotectiveness that felt like love but now reeks of fear. The way she lashed out whenever questions came too close to the verity, and the consummation hits him with a physical force. His life has been erected on a taradiddle, and the person who told it most convincingly was his own mama. Victor continues, grim but precise, explaining how the samples were attained fairly, how the results were verified singly, how the real natural connection points away, and while he doesn't incontinently name the father, because Victor savors timing further than spectacle, the recrimination alone is enough to devastate Daniel, who stumbles back as if the bottom has given way, his voice cracking as he asks the one question that matters utmost: why? And that single word slices through Phyllis's defenses in a way nothing differently could, because there's no strategic answer to a child asking why his entire identity was manipulated. She talks about survival, about protection, about making hard choices in a cruel world, but every defense only digs the hole deeper. Because Daniel doesn't hear a mama who made a mistake, he hears a woman who chose control over honesty again and again, who decided that she knew better than everyone differently what he could handle, and the desolation hardens into commodity colder, commodity further endless, as Daniel realizes this wasn't one taradiddle but a continuance of them. Genoa city rolls as word spreads with lightning speed, because secrets no way stay contained when Victor Newman pulls the leg, and responses explode across city, with a better scrabbling to pick sides and adversaries savoring Phyllis's fall. But none of that matters inside the room where Daniel eventually turns down from her, physically creating distance that feels like an ocean, telling her through gashes and rage that he doesn't know who she's presently, that he doesn't know who he's presently, and that whatever relationship they had just shattered under the weight of her choices. Phyllis begs, she pleads, she reaches for him, but Daniel flinches as if burned, because the closeness she's asking for now feels fraudulent, poisoned by times of deception, and Victor watches with a complicated expression, not satisfaction, not exactly, but a grim certainty that this outgrowth was ineluctable the moment the taradiddle was born. Still, He delivers the final blow with nipping clarity, revealing that the real father has been known to Phyllis for times, that she laboriously suppressed the verity to cover herself from consequences she didn't want to face, and that disclosure seals Daniel's desolation into commodity unrecoverable, because it confirms that this wasn't fear or confusion, it was computation. The room seems to close in as Daniel's wrathfulness erupts, not in screaming but in ruinous calm, as he tells Phyllis that he needs space, that he can't indeed look at her, that trust doesn't survive treason like this, and when he walks out, the sound of the door feels like a verdict. Phyllis collapses into fury and grief in equal measure, lashing out at Victor for destroying her family, but Victor stands unmoved, reminding her that families are destroyed by falsehoods, not by the people who expose them, and as he leaves her there with the wreckage of her own timber, Genoa City is left stupefied by the fallout, because Daniel's future is now a blank slate written over with pain, questions, and a brewing battle with the verity about his natural father, while Phyllis faces the unbelievable reality that the son she fought so virulently to cover may no way forgive her, and the heritage of her biggest taradiddle will echo through their lives for times to come, reshaping alliances, kindling old vendettas, and proving formally again that when Victor Newman drops a DNA stunner, no bone walks down unchanged. In the immediate fate of Victor Newman's DNA stunner, Genoa City doesn't just buzz, it convulses, because exposures like this don't fade still into gossip, they metastasize, infecting every relationship Daniel touches. And as he storms down from that shattering battle, the weight of unanswered questions presses down on him so heavily it feels hard to breathe, his studies looping through the same agonizing trueness over and over again. Phyllis prevaricated. Phyllis knew, Phyllis chose herself, and each reiteration cuts deeper than the last. He wanders the megacity nearly erratically at first, recollections ambuscading him on every corner, laughing with his mama at society, defending her to musketeers who advised him she was manipulative. Standing by her during dishonors he now realizes were no way accidents but patterns, and the rage that builds inside him is intimidating precisely because it's so controlled, so focused, the kind that doesn't explode and burn out but settles into the bones and refuses to leave. Meanwhile, Phyllis is unraveling in real time, pacing her living room like a trapped beast, replaying Victor's words with a blend of fury and unbelief, telling herself over and over that he'd no right, that he stole commodity sacred from her, that she did what she had to do to survive, yet no matter how fiercely she argues with the empty air, the verity keeps clawing its way back, and she didn't just lie formerly. She curated a taradiddle for decades, she shaped Daniel's reality around her own fear of losing control, and now that precisely constructed world has collapsed, calls go unanswered, dispatches remain unlettered, and with every hour of silence from Daniel, fear coils tighter around her casket. Because Phyllis has always believed she could talk her way out of anything, that her words could bend reality back into place, but this time the words feel useless, flimsy against the sheer magnitude of what's been exposed. Victor, for his part, doesn't retreat into the murk after dropping the lemon. He stands firm, bracing for the counter-reaction he knows is coming, because while he tells himself this was about verity and justice, there's a splinter of satisfaction he can't deny. A sense that he's eventually stripped Phyllis of the moral high ground she's applied like a armament for times, and as responses ripple through the Newman rout, some still hail him for doing what no bone differently dared, while others question whether this was necessary, whether indeed Phyllis merited to be disassembled so intimately, but Victor remains unmoved, averring that falsehoods of this magnitude bane generations and must be gutted fully. Daniel ultimately seeks retreat with the one person he trusts to tell him the verity without spin, and that discussion becomes another emotional landmine, because hearing someone differently validate his wrathfulness, his sense of treason, makes the reality insolvable to escape, and when they gently suggest that Victor wouldn't fabricate commodity like this, that the DNA doesn't lie indeed when people do, Daniel feels commodity inside him fracture permanently, a final crack that seals the end of his eyeless fidelity to Phyllis. As night falls, he sits alone, gaping at old prints on his phone, him and his mama smiling, arms wrapped around each other, and rather of comfort, the images bring a concave pang. Because he can't tell presently which moments were real and which were performances designed to keep him exactly where she wanted him. Across city, whispers consolidate as the scuttlebutt shop shifts into overdrive, and names start to face in hushed exchanges about who Daniel's real father might be, with Enterprise reigniting old dishonors and dragging long-buried secrets back into the light, forcing people who allowed they were safe in the history to suddenly regard over their shoulders. Phyllis becomes acutely apprehensive that this isn't just a particular extremity presently, it's a public reckoning, and the knowledge that non-natives are anatomizing her choices, judging her fatherhood, energies her fury indeed as it deepens her insulation, because every instinct tells her to fight, to lash out, to rewrite the narrative yet again, but the room is empty, the followership gone, and without Daniel there to convert, her power evaporates, despair drives her to consider the unbelievable, finding Daniel's natural father herself and controlling that preface, spinning it as an act of courage rather than another manipulation, but indeed she recognizes the threat, because if Daniel discovers she's still maneuvering behind the scenes, whatever fragile thread remains between them will snap beyond form. Daniel, meanwhile, is visited by the brewing question Victor designedly left unanswered, and that elision gnaws at him more than any cried blameworthiness could, because not knowing feels like being suspended over an ocean, and every possibility terrifies him in a different way, each implicit father reshaping his identity, his history, his future, and he realizes with a sickening clarity that indeed if he no way speaks to Phyllis again, she has formerly altered his life irrevocably. The coming battle, when it comes, is quieter but no less ruinous, because Daniel eventually agrees to see Phyllis, not out of remission but necessity, and the air between them is thick with grief and rage as she tries to reach him with pulsing honesty, admitting she was wrong, that fear drove her choices, that she no way meant to hurt him, but Daniel stops her mid-sentence, telling her he doesn't need explanations right now, that every defense sounds like another reason, another attempt to control how he feels, and the calm futurity in his voice shatters her further than any laugh could. He tells her he needs time, that trust isn't commodity you demand back after destroying it, that perhaps one day they can talk about remission, but moment isn't that day, and as he walks down again, Phyllis understands for the first time that she may have lost him not temporarily, but ever. Victor watches the fallout with the grim tolerance of a man who knows consequences take time, apprehensive that the true damage of his disclosure will unfold sluggishly, sorrowfully. As Daniel navigates connections now tainted by dubitation, as Phyllis confronts a loneliness she can't talk her way out of, and as Genoa City braces for the coming surge, the ineluctable reveal of the natural father, a verity that promises to renew old injuries and produce new alliances no bone sees coming, because this DNA stunner wasn't an ending, it was a morning, the first crack in a fault line that will continue to resolve families, review commitment, and prove that some falsehoods, formerly exposed, don't just shatter trust, they permanently change the people who survive them. The days that follow feel fantastic to Daniel, like he's moving through an interpretation of Genoa City that looks the same on the face but has shifted underneath his bases, because far and wide he turns there are echoes of a life he no longer completely believes in, and the most brutal part isn't indeed the wrathfulness presently, it's the disorientation. The sense that the emotional compass he reckoned on for times has been smashed beyond form, leaving him doubtful which way is north. He keeps replaying Victor's words in his head, the clinical certainty of the DNA results, the way Phyllis's face betrayed her before her mouth ever could, and each time the memory circles, it tightens the knot in his casket a little more, because no matter how important he wants to find a loophole, a misreading, a lab error, the verity keeps snapping back into place with merciless clarity. Biology doesn't bend to love, and wisdom doesn't watch about intentions. Sleep becomes fugitive, visited by dreams where exchanges from his knowledge renewal with altered meaning, Phyllis averring they move suddenly, Phyllis steering him down from certain people, Phyllis bristling whenever questions about his father surfaced, and waking up only brings fresh swells of nausea as he realizes how numerous red flags he ignored because trusting her felt easier than distrusting her. Meanwhile, the megacity closes in around Phyllis like a tensing mesh, because the same character she formerly applied as armor now works against her, and doors that used to open with a smile suddenly mirror with polite defenses, sympathetic aesthetics masking judgment, as though everyone is quietly asking the same question she can't escape. How could a mama do this to her child? She switches out at first, condemning Victor, condemning old adversaries, condemning the city itself for roistering in her pain, but the fury doesn't stick the way it used to, sliding off the crushing weight of guilt that keeps resurfacing at the most precocious moments, especially when she's alone, gaping at Daniel's empty room, his absence screaming louder than any blameworthiness ever could. Victor, ever the strategist, begins still laying route for what comes next, because he knows a stunner like this leaves a crater, and craters attract opportunists, manipulators, and long-buried ghosts, so he starts making calls, pulling lines, reconsidering old connections that date back to the time frame Phyllis allowed was safely sealed off ever, and while he insists to anyone who questions him that he's finished snooping, the verity is Victor Newman no way walks down from a story until he's seen every angle, especially when the verity threatens to upend multiple power structures in Genoa City. Daniel ultimately realizes that avoiding the verity about his natural father is only dragging the agony, and with reticent resoluteness, he confronts Victor again, demanding answers not as a pawn or an bystander, but as the man whose life is hanging in the balance, and Victor doesn't sugarcoat it, explaining that he held back the name not to afflict him but to ensure the reveal doesn't spark a chain response before Daniel is ready, because the man in question isn't just a citation from the once, he's someone whose presence would shake several families, renew old battles, and complicate Daniel's future in ways indeed Victor California ain't completely control. That warning alone is enough to shoot a bite through Daniel, because it confirms his worst fear. This isn't just about identity, it's about fallout, and suddenly the question of who his father is feels less like a particular verity and more like a live line staying to be touched. Still, Daniel presses on, because query is eating him alive, and when Victor eventually agrees to tell him the name, still, intimately, without substantiations, the moment stretches unbearably long, the silence thick with times of consequences, until the name lands with a dull, ruinous weight that leaves Daniel reeling, because it's not a foreigner, not some faceless man from the history, but someone whose shadow has formerly impended over his life in subtle, uncelebrated ways, someone whose history with Phyllis was more unpredictable, more complicated, and more dangerous than he ever imagined. The consummation sends Daniel twisting, because it reframes numerous relations, casting them in a harsher, more dangerous light. And as the counter-accusations settle in, his wrathfulness toward Phyllis morphs into commodity indeed more painful, a profound sadness for the youngish interpretation of himself who no way had a chance to know the verity, who was burgled not just of honesty but of informed choice. Phyllis senses the shift nearly incontinently, the unnoticeable thread between mama and son wobbling with pressure, and when Daniel confronts her again, this time armed with the name, the timeline, the full compass of her deception, there's nowhere left for her to hide, no narrative left to spin, and the rawness of the battle strips them both bare, as Daniel demands to know how she could look him in the eye for times knowing the verity would change everything, and Phyllis eventually breaks in a way she no way has ahead, not theatrically, not strategically, but hugely, admitting she was alarmed, that she believed revealing the verity would expose Daniel to peril, to rejection, to a father who might not want him or might hurt him simply by being. And for a fragile moment, Daniel nearly understands, because fear is a language he speaks easily now, but the understanding doesn't abolish the treason, doesn't undo the times of manipulation disguised as protection. The battle ends not with check but with prostration, both of them drained by the enormity of what's been said and what remains undetermined, and as Daniel walks down formerly more, he carries a new burden, the knowledge that his coming step, whether to defy his natural father or walk down, will define the rest of his life. Genoa City holds its breath as whispers evolve into near certainties, alliances still recalibrating as people prepare for the ineluctable collision between Daniel and the man who intentionally shaped his actuality. And Victor watches it all with the sick intensity of someone who understands too well the cost of verity, knowing that while he exposed Phyllis's lie to cover the future, he may also have unleashed a storm that will consume far further than he intended. Phyllis, left standing in the wreckage of her own choices, begins to understand that redemption, if it's possible at each, wouldn't come through grand gestures or clever words, but through tolerance, responsibility, and accepting that she may no way completely recapture what she lost, and that consummation, quiet, crushing, and necessary, marks the true end of her old tone. As the chapter closes, Daniel stands on the edge of a future he no way asked for, torn between rage and curiosity, fidelity and tone preservation, knowing that the verity has eventually set him free but at a ruinous cost, and as Genoa City braces for the coming disclosure, one thing is clear: Victor's DNA stunner didn't just shatter a taradiddle, it rewrote fates, icing that nothing, and no bone, will ever be the same again.